Hi, welcome back to Space Thoughts. Today I'm gonna hop on another one of my pet peeves. As you may, if you watch these videos, you know I have a lot of pet peeves, but this is another one, and this is the idea of the phrase militarization of outer space. I've been confronted with this a lot in the past couple of weeks. Once when I was during a show, online show, and just recently I saw this in an article a few weeks ago, and just today I found an article in Politico that gets back into the whole idea of militarization in outer space, and we'll take that up here. Now, I'm not going to discuss this article because it really deals with things about the moon, and I don't want to get into this territory right now. But it comes up with this concept. It really utilizes this concept of, again, or this phrase, militarization of outer space, and I really hate that because uh, the militarization of outer space is a narrative that is created by the Soviet Union, the Russian Federation, and the People's Republic of China. And I'm going to give you a little bit of history of this. Back during the negotiation for the Outer Space Treaty, one of the contentious issues between the Soviet Union and the US was the idea of space for use by military and for national security purposes. And the Soviet Union basically came out and said, look, we want these words, no militarization of outer space. They wanted those specific words in it. The US, on the other hand, wanted wanted to use the phrase peaceful purposes. Now, this went back and forth and for a while, and the Soviets had to admit it at some point that militarization would be the idea of, banning militarization of outer space would be a non-starter because they were already using it for military purposes, remote sensing satellites, etc. So that really was a non-starter. So what fell into play was the U.S. proposal, peaceful purposes. And if you look at the Outer Space Treaty today, that it's in there, and you see it prominently in Article 4 of the Outer Space Treaty. And Article 4 deals with a lot of other things about, what the military can and can't do in kind of vague terms. But again, we're not going to go into that. Those are other areas that I don't want to really delve into at this point. But the whole idea is, again, I'm looking at an article. This one's in Politico, and basically it's getting into this idea and using these words, militarization of outer space. And I see this a lot with NGOs, with the media. The Russian Federation uses it a lot. The People's Republic of China uses it a lot to demonize, in a sense, the U.S. geopolitically, and saying, "Oh, you're militarizing outer space." Well, space has been militarized for a long time. Let's just face it. I mean, there since the beginning of the space age, space has been used for national security purposes. And I'm going to lump the idea of militarization into national security, and that basically started with the Discoverer program when we started orbiting satellites to take photo reconnaissance photos of the Soviet Union, and it expanded, and now we quote military utilizes or national security uses of outer space is quite prominent. Reconnaissance satellites, military communications satellites, even GPS. We all take for granted the idea of GPS we have in our cars or our phones to help us get from point A to point B. That's something we take for granted. This is actually a military program or military funded program and operated program, but it has peaceful use. But the idea is it's being used for peaceful uses. And that's the whole key with this whole idea of militarization. Militarization isn't banned per se by the Outer Space Treaty, so long as it's used for peaceful purposes. And that's, I think, what the U.S. is trying to get at in the Outer Space Treaty, because the Soviet Union was trying to put us into a corner, saying you can't do any military activities, even those that have a non-aggressive, peaceful purpose. And again, if there's a lot of things out there that in the old archives of the negotiation of the Outer Space Treaty that talk about this. But again, like, this is a real pet peeve for me, just because every time we talk about militarization, we talk about new programs. Well, like here, the Space Force. The Space Force, as soon as this came out, the NGOs were coming out and talking about the militarization of outer space. Well, I mean, the Russian Federation and the People's Republic of China had similar commands that basically militarized outer space, but nobody is talking about what they're doing. But at the same time, they're throwing mud over on our side of the fence, claiming about militarization of outer space. So again, this is kind of a pet peeve with me. I really hate the term militarization of outer space, just because I think it's disingenuous. It creates a narrative that this is something that's going to be used for non-peaceful purposes, and basically people make create these narratives and create these propaganda to push back against programs like, or organizations like the Space Force or even national security. So understand, the idea is it isn't about militarization of outer space, it's peaceful purposes on outer space. And I mean, if you really want to go back to it, I mean, if we want to talk about militarization of outer space, even the Russian Federation has basically ignored it. They, in fact, I think they've even ignored the peaceful purposes provisions of the Outer Space Treaty with some of their recent activities. Again, that's a matter of interpretation and debate and messaging, but I really think they have done that all the while, basically accusing the outer space of militarization of outer space. And you'll see this with the PRC and the Russian Federation and the UN. They are not about norms behavior or such. They're all about banning, quote, banning weaponization of outer space, i.e. banning the militarization of outer space, all the while having a counter space capability to, basically take out our space assets, even though it's ground-based. And arguably, they even have some space-based assets that could be non-peaceful in a manner. And I think a good example, is that the I believe it's the SJ-21 demonstration that the People's Republic of China recently performed in geosynchronous orbit by moving one of its dead Beidou satellites into almost a graveyard orbit. So I mean, again, the question is, was that a demonstration of something that was peaceful, or was it a demonstration of a non-peaceful capability? So again, my big point on this is this whole idea of militarization of outer space is garbage. Even though the media loves to jump on it and loves to promote it, and NGOs love to jump on it and promote and use this to rail against military programs or national security activities. Understand, it isn't about militarization of outer space. If you're doing, in my opinion, if you're using that as a narrative, that's basically Soviet propaganda, and that might be inflammatory, but that's calling it like I see it and being blunt. It's basically, in my opinion, Soviet propaganda that's been recycled from the outer space negotiation years and being reused again just to cause a stir. So again, it's not militarization, it's peaceful purposes, and let's get that narrative straight when we talk about these things. So that's all I have for this one. We'll talk to you next time.